Shvi'is Perek Tes Mishnah Aleph. As we mentioned several times, somebody who owns a piece of land in Eretz Yisrael is mechuyev to let people enter his property during Shemitah and take whatever's growing there. If an owner protects his field to prevent people from entering, for example, he locks the gate, he violated this mitzvah. Moreover, it's forbidden to buy produce from someone who protected his field because that would support his unlawful act. Amei haaretz are suspected of not observing the halachas of Shemitah properly. It's therefore also to buy most species of produce from them. This Mishnah is going to list 6 things that are exceptions to the rule and explain why. So ha-pegam, v'ha-yarbuzin, ha-shaitim, v'ha-chalagloigois, kusbar shebahorim, v'ha-karpas shebanahoros, v'ha-gargar shel ofar. So we're going to translate it the way article translates it, not that I know or anybody knows what these things are. So pegam is rue, R-U-E. Yarbuzin is wild asparagus. Shaitim is purslane. Chalagloigois is mountain coriander. Kusbar shebahorim is the kusbar shebahorim is probably mountain coriander. Karpas shebanahoros is river celery, and gargar shel afor is meadow rocket. The Mishnah specifies wild asparagus, mountain coriander, river celery, and meadow rocket, as opposed to the varieties of these produce products that are cultivated in gardens. The Mishnah is telling us the halacha in the Mishnah does not apply to the garden varieties because they are more valuable and will not be abandoned by their owners. So all these vegetables are patur min ha-maisros, are potter from meiser and trumas, even in non-Shemitah years, and they may be bought from any person, even in Amoritz, during Shemitah, because no vegetable like these is protected by the owner. These species are worth so little that their owners abandon them and give up their rights of ownership. Since they are ownerless, they are hefker, they're potter from trumas and maisros even during non-Shemitah years. We learned this out from a pasuk that the chiyuv of separating maisros does not apply to produce that is hefker. The Mishnah's halacha is relevant only during non-Shemitah years, because during the year of Shemitah, all produce is potter from meiser, and not only those species mentioned here. And since they're worth so little, one may buy them from Amoritz during Shemitah because he would not guard them illegally. Although these abandoned species may be purchased from Amei haaretz, they're still Shemitah produce and must be treated with kedusha shvius. They must be eaten or used for purposes similar to eating and may not be wasted or used for business. The money received from the sale of Shemitah produce acquires the kedusha of the produce and is subject to the same halachas. Amei haaretz, however, who cannot be trusted to observe the hilchas Shemitah, might use the money for something that's aser. Therefore, the Chachamim limit the amount one may pay an Amoritz for Shemitah produce to the value of 3 meals. Since this is the amount needed for 1 day's worth of food, we assume that the Amoritz will use it to buy food, and the halacha, as the halacha requires, and not use it shaloi kedin. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Sviche Chardal Mutarin. The Mishnah moves on to another topic. There's Isser Midrabanan against Svichen. Svichen are plants that grew from seeds that fell from the crop of the 6th year. Since they were not illegally planted during Shemitah, these plants are mutar min ha-Torah. The Chachamim, though, were concerned that people might plant these crops during Shemitah shaloi kedin and then claim that what grew is the aftergrowth of the 6th year's crop. To prevent this, the Chachamim decreed that aftergrowths are aser. The Mishnah presents 3 opinions, 3 different Tanoim, as to which species are included in this Isser of Svichen. So Rabbi Yehuda says Sviche Chardal Mutarin, aftergrowths of mustard are mutar, because even lawbreakers, even people who are not careful about Hilchos Shemitah, are not suspected regarding them. That is, even people who plant crops during Shemitah would not cultivate mustard plants because they're of very little value. Since the Chachamim forbade aftergrowths only to prevent people from planting during Shemitah shaloi kedin and then claiming that what grew is from the previous year's harvest, the Gzeira does not apply to mustard seed, which are worth so little that people would not break the halacha to plant them. All the other species, however, are included in the Gzeira. Reb Shimon Aimer, the second shita, Reb Shimon says, Kol ha-svichim mutarin, all aftergrowths are permitted, chutz me-svichei kruv, she'en kayetz behem b'yarka soda, except the aftergrowths of cabbage, the likes of which are not found amongst vegetables in the field. Aftergrowths of cabbage look the same as the cabbage that was deliberately planted. Thus, someone who could plant cabbage illegally, meaning shaloi kedin and Shemitah, and claim that it was just an aftergrowth, the Chachamim therefore asered aftergrowths of cabbage. However, regarding all other vegetables, a person could not pretend that what he planted is svichen, because vegetables planted deliberately are bigger and healthier than svichen, which grow by accident, they grow more wild. There's no reason then to aser any svichen except the sviche kruv, the aftergrowths of cabbage. The Chachamim say kol asvichin asurin, all aftergrowths are forbidden without any exception. Technically speaking, theoretically, the Chachamim agree with Reb Shimon that there's no reason to aser svichin of anything except for cabbage. According to the Chacham, however, the Chacham were concerned that if svichin of other minim, of other species, were permitted, this would have undermined the necessary decree against eating cabbage aftergrowths, and they therefore asered all svichin altogether. Shalosh haratzis labir, Mishnah Beis, Shalosh haratzis labir. The rest of the parak is going to discuss the halachas of beer. A person may pick limited amounts of produce during Shemitah and keep them in his house for the use of himself and his family, as long as that type of produce can still be found in the fields for wild animals to eat. Once a species is no longer available outdoors to wild animals, he's forbidden to keep any of that species in his house. At this point, he must perform the process of beer, in which he gives up his rights of ownership in the produce, and puts it outside his house for anyone to take. If beer is not performed at the required time, the produce may never be eaten. The chiyuv to perform beer is determined not by a species' availability in Eretz Yisrael as a whole, but by its availability in the region in which it grew. The Mishnah is going to identify the areas of Eretz Yisrael that determine the availability of the species. So again, Shalosh haratzis labir, there are 3 lands in Eretz Yisrael for the purposes of beer. Yehuda, ve'ever hayarden, v'hagolil. Yehuda is the south of Eretz Yisrael, and the west side of the Ever hayarden is the west side of the Yarden, the center of Eretz Yisrael, and the Golil, the north of Eretz Yisrael. As long as a type of produce is available to wild animals somewhere in a particular province, it may be eaten at home anywhere in that province. Once it disappears from a field, once it disappears from the fields of a province, eating it without beer is usher throughout that province, even if it's still available in the other 2 areas. Each one of these 3 regions get broken down more specifically. In each one of these 3 gets broken down into another 3. Each of the 3 provinces, meaning Yehuda, Ve'ever Hayarden, V'Hagolil, are itself divided into 3 regions, with each region corresponding to a particular type of terrain: mountainous areas, lowlands, and valleys. The three regions of each province are mentioned in order to help identify the boundaries of the province. In some cases, there's also halachic consequences we'll explain in a minute. So Galil ha'elyon v'Galil ha'tachton v'Emek. The 3 regions in the Galil are the Upper Galilee, the Lower Galilee, and the Valley. Mikvar Chananya ulamaylan, the mountainous territory from Kfar Chananya and above, northward. Kol she'enim megadol shikmin, wherever the terrain does not support the growth of sycamore trees because of its mountain. As a general rule, the higher you go, the lower and shorter the trees are. So it's not Megadol Shikman anymore, because they need a lot of ground where the roots could go, and it can't go through the mountains, so it doesn't grow there. The Galil Elyon is the Upper Galilee, and the lowlands extending from Kfar Chananya and below, southward Kolshu Megadol Shikman, wherever the terrain does support the growth of sycamore trees because of its flat terrain. Galil HaTachtain is the Lower Galilee, Utchum Tveria Ha'emek, and the vicinity of Tveria is in the valley. Sycamores tend to grow only in low-lying areas. As such, they are found in the area south of Kfar Chananya, which are lowlands, but not in the area of Kfar Chananya, which is itself mountainous. Ubi Yehuda, so this is all in the Galil. So we have Galil HaTachtain, V'Emek, Kfar Chananya L'mayla, Kol She'enim Megadol Shikman, Galil Elyon, Kfar Chananya L'mata, is Kol She'enim Megadol Shikman, and Galil HaTachtain, Tzchum Tveria Emek. Okay. Ubi Yehuda, and these are the 3 regions within Yehuda. Hahar, Shvela, V'Ha'emek, the mountains of Judea, the lowlands of Judea. Hahar, Shvela, V'Emek, the mountains. The Shvela is the lowlands, and the Emek is the valley. The Shvela is Lud, K'Shvela Sadarim. The lowlands of Lud, which is a low-lying region on the west side of the Yarden, has the same status as the lowlands of the south, which is the low-lying region of Yehuda. As long as the type of produce can still be found in the lowlands of the south in Yehuda, that type of produce may be eaten at home in the lowlands of Loid, in the central province. V'Har Shalo Kahar HaMelech. And the mountains of Loid, which is the mountainous region of the west side of the Yarden, has the same status as the mountains of the king, which is Har HaMelech, which is the mountainous region of Yehuda. As long as the type of produce can still be found in the mountains of Yehuda, of Har HaMelech in Yehuda, it may be eaten at home in the mountains of Loid, the mountainous area on the west side of the Yarden. Although the Mishnah taught above that there are 3 provinces regarding Hilchas Beer, that is, once a species becomes unavailable in one province, it may not be eaten anywhere in that province, even if it can be found elsewhere. There are 2 places in the country that are exceptions to this rule. There are 2 places of the lowlands in the mountainous area on the west side of the Yarden. The species does not require beer in the lowlands or the west side of the Yarden, as long as it can still be found in the lowlands of Yehuda, even if it has completely disappeared from the entire west side of the Yarden. Likewise, a species does not require beer in the mountainous area of the west side of the Yarden, as long as it can still be found in the mountainous area of Yehuda, even if it has completely disappeared from the entire west side of the Yarden. Thus far, the Mishnah has named two of the three regions of the west side of the Yarden, the lowlands of Lod and the mountain of Lod, and now identifies the third region, the territory that extends from Beis Chayrin to the Mediterranean Sea is one region. This is the valley region of the west side of the Jordan. The Mishnah describes the valley region of the west side of the Jordan as one region to show that it's different from the mountainous areas and the lowlands of the west side of the Jordan. In order for the mountainous areas or lowlands to require beer, all produce of that species must have disappeared, not only from the entire west side of the Yarden, but also from the mountainous and low-lying regions of Yehuda, respectively. However, the deadline for the valley of the west side of the Yarden is determined only by availability of the species in that region itself, and has nothing to do with its availability in Yehuda. Mishnah Gimel. V'lama amru shalosh haratzos. The previous Mishnah taught that Eretz Yisrael is divided into three provinces with the regard to Hilchas Beer, and that each of these provinces are subdivided into three regions. The Mishnah explains why the Mishnah did not simply say that there are 9 regions. Why did the Chachamim have to say, V'lama amru shalosh haratzos? Why did the Chachamim say 3 lands? Since each province is divided into 3 regions, there's in fact a total of 9 lands. So the Mishnah, the Chachamim specify 3 lands in order to teach that we may continue eating produce in any one province until the last of that species disappears from all 3 regions of that province. However, if it can still be found in one region of the province, we may continue eating it in the other regions in the province, because the province is treated as a single unified area in regard to beer, despite the fact that it can be divided into smaller regions. So in essence, the reason why we're saying Shalosh Haratzos is a big kula, because if even if something's not in that specific area, it's further out, it's still, you can be saimich on that for beer, despite the fact that it can be divided into smaller regions. Thus, in practice, there are only 3 lands, which are the 3 provinces. So then the question is, why does the Mishnah have to mention the fact that each one of these 3 provinces is broken down into another 3 provinces? Since the beer deadline depends on the availability of species to wild animals, the boundaries of an area regarding beer depend on which animals will go in search of food. The Chacham received a Messiah, a Kabbalah from previous generations, that the wild animals of Eretz Yisrael roam from one region to another within a single province to seek food. For example, they'll go from the mountainous areas of Yehuda to the lowlands of Yehuda, but they tend not to roam from one province to another. They're not going to go from Yehuda to Golub. Each province, therefore, is regarded as a single entity. That's what it says in the Rav. They're not going to go to the other provinces. If there are 2 exceptions, however. Animals roam between the mountainous areas of the west side of the Yarden and the mountainous area of Yehuda, meaning that the mountainous areas of the west and Yehuda are one, meaning have the same halacha, and they also roam between the lowlands of the west side of the Yarden and the lowlands of Yehuda, as we mentioned in the previous Mishnah. Reb Shimon says, "Le'amr shalosh haratzos ela b'Yehuda." The Chachamim mentioned 3 lands with regard to Yehuda, but not anywhere else. That is, when the Chachamim mentioned 3 lands, they're referring to the 3 different regions of Yehuda: the mountains of Yehuda, the Har, the Shvela, and the Emek. The Har is the mountains, the Shvela is the lowlands, and the Emek is the valley. Each of these regions is a separate area in regard to beer. Thus, for example, when a type of produce disappears from the mountainous region of Yehuda, one may not eat it in that region, even if it's still available in the lowlands of Yehuda or in the valley of Yehuda, which is different than what we just explained. Which is interesting, because Hagam, the Reb Shimon, is makel in terms of Sichin, that he holds that there's no problem with Sichin ever, but in terms of the Chumrah, it seems like Reb Shimon is being machmir in regard to the Shalosh Haratzos b'Yehuda, meaning that they're very specific, and there was no makom to be makel from one area to another. Rishar Kol Haratzos Kar HaMelech, but all the other provinces of Eretz Yisrael, the Galil and the Ma'ariv of the Yarden, have the same beer deadline as the Har HaMelech, and produce is abundant in the mountainous region of Yehuda and remains in the fields later than anywhere else in the country. So that's why. And all the lands of Eretz Yisrael are the same with respect to olives and dates. We may eat either of these 2 species as long as it can still be found anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, because the entire country, the entire land of Eretz Yisrael, is deemed one area for this halacha. In search of olives and dates, wild animals who roam even from one province to another. As such, the time of beer for each one of those 2 species does not arrive until it has disappeared from all of Eretz Yisrael. Mishnah Dalet. Oichlin ala mufkar The beer deadline for a certain species arrives when that species is no longer available in the fields to wild animals. The Mishnah defines the types of fields to which this rule refers. Achlin ala mufkar, we may continue to eat a species in the home on account of produce that is found in ownerless fields, since such fields are open to wild animals. Avalei ala shomer, but we may not eat a species in the home on account of produce that's growing in protected places. For example, fruit growing on trees in courtyards, because wild animals cannot and will not enter those areas. Since wild animals have no access to protected areas, any produce growing there cannot be described as available to wild animals. Therefore, even if a species is still present in a protected area, that's irrelevant to the halachas of beer. Rather, the zman beer arrives as soon as the species disappear from the open fields, even if it can still be found in the protected area. So, Echlin ala mufkar v'lei ala shomer. Rabbi Yossi mater af ala shomer. Rabbi Yossi allows one to continue eating a species in the home, even on account of produce growing in protected places, although the animals cannot reach it. According to Rabbi Yossi, the Torah's requirement that a Shemitah crop be available for wild animals does not literally mean that wild animals can eat it. As long as the produce is still attached to the trees or the ground in any place, even if it cannot be accessed by wild animals, there's no chiyuv of beer. Meaning that the pshat is that as long as it's available, as long as it's still on the ground. So if it's going to be on the ground in a place where a wild animal could come and eat it, fine. And if it's in a place where a wild animal cannot come and eat it, but it's still attached to the ground, that's also good. That's what Rabbi Yossi holds. Oichlin ala tzfichin, we may continue to eat a species on account of produce that birds put in their nesting pots. Nesting pots are small earthenware vessels built into the exterior walls of houses in which birds would rest. Birds would gather kernels of grain from the fields and bring them to their pots. The entire time the Shemitah kernels are found in the pots, the zman beer has not yet arrived, and one may continue to eat these kernels at home. Even the Tanna Kama would agree with this halacha. Although the grain in the pots is not accessible to wild animals, it's not shomer since it can be eaten by the other birds. Val hadufra, and on account of the second crop of a double crop tree. Dufra is the word du-pra, like du-pri, like two fruits. So it's a tree that produced two. Some fruit-bearing trees produce two crops in a single year. If a person stored fruits from the first harvest at home, he may continue eating them as long as some fruits from the later harvest is still available. Since the two harvests yielded the same type of produce and they occurred in the same year, the zman beer did not arrive until the fruits of both harvests disappear from the tree. Avaloi al hasesvaniyos, but we may not eat early ripening grapes, which fully ripen during Shemitah, on account of winter grapes. Sisfa is winter, which begin to ripen on Shemitah, but do not become fully ripe until the winter of the 8th year. Winter grapes are given their names because they grow mainly in the winter. Winter grapes that began to ripen during Shemitah are considered perishvias, even though they are not picked until after they have grown completely in the winter of the next year. Since these grapes have the status of Shemitah produce, the beer deadline should depend on their availability in the fields. That is, we should be allowed to eat any Shemitah grapes the entire time the winter grapes are in the field. The Chacham, however, with Geyser, the winter grapes should not be taken into account in determining the zman beer, because they seem like produce of the 8th year. Rabbi Yehuda allows one to continue eating early ripening grapes on account of winter grapes, provided that the winter grapes had begun ripening before the summer harvest had not yet ended. Rabbi Yehuda maintains that if the winter grapes had begun ripening before the end of the Shemitah harvest, it's clear that they are Shemitah produce, even though they do not fully ripen until the 8th year. Thus, there's no need for the Gzerah of the Rabbanon in this particular case. We may therefore continue eating the early ripening grapes the entire time that these winter grapes can still be found in the field. Mishnah Hey. If someone pickles 3 types of vegetables in a single barrel of vinegar or salt water, and each type absorbs the flavor of the other 2 types. Rabbi Lezer says we may eat the vegetables only on account of the first species to reach its zman beer. As soon as one of the species in the barrel reaches the zman beer, all the vegetables in the barrel are now mechuyev in beer because they contain the tam of that which has the chiyuv of beer. Rabbi Yeshua says we may eat all the vegetables even on account of the last species to reach zman beer. Even if 2 of the species have passed their beer deadlines, we continue to eat them because of the single species that has not yet reached its deadline. Since the first 2 species have absorbed flavor from the 3rd species, which is still mutter, they too are mutter, meaning that's why you could wait until after the last one. According to Yeshua, the fact that one species has absorbed flavor from another species creates a kula, not a chumrah like Rabbi Lezer. He learns from a pasuk in the Torah that even after a species has disappeared from the fields, we may continue eating it if it contains some aspect, even just the flavor of a species that's still permitted, so you'll have a much longer time period. Ram Gamliel says, Kol shakol mina min asada yuvar mina min hachavis. When one of the species has disappeared from the field, one has to remove that species from the barrel and perform beer on it. Since its Zman beer has arrived, we may continue eating the other two species whose Zman beer has not yet arrived. According to this shita, each min in the barrel is treated as a separate entity despite the fact that it has the tam from the other two species. Ram Gamliel learned that from a pasuk that the chiyuv of beer takes effect on the substance of a vegetable and not on the tam which it already gave to other food. With nice and tam. Thus, when a vegetable passes its beer deadline, only the vegetable itself becomes mechuyev in beer, while any flavor it has imparted to the other food does not require beer. We may therefore continue eating the other food despite the flavor it absorbs from the now forbidden vegetable, since the chiyuv beer never took effect on the flavor. Halacha Kedvarov, the Mishnah adds that the halacha follows the shita of Ram Gamliel that kol shekol minay min asada yavar binay min hachavis, that each min is when that min is in the barrel, even if it's cooking, whatever, sitting with other paris, with other minim, it's dependent on when that min's man beer arrives. Reb Shimon says, Kol yarek echad lebir, all species of vegetables are treated as one with regard to beer. There's no chiyuv to remove vegetables from the house as long as vegetables of any species are available in the field. Thus, even if all three of the species in the barrel have disappeared from the fields, we may continue to eat all three as long as there are some type of vegetables that are still available. Reb Shimon holds that all vegetables have the same zman beer, namely that every type of vegetable has disappeared from the fields. Accordingly, even after all the three species in the barrel are no longer found in the fields for wild animals at all, we may continue to eat them the entire time that any type of vegetable can be found anywhere else. It's not necessary to remove any of them from the house until all vegetables are gone from the fields. The Mishnah now deals with a vegetable called purslane, which survives for a long time. It's hard to tell when this vegetable is no longer available to wild animals, because even after it has disappeared from open areas, it might still be growing in hidden places. Therefore, the Mishnah gives a siman by which to determine that this regila has completely disappeared. So, we may continue to eat purslane until the time that the artichokes disappear from the valley of Beis Taifa, which is an exceptionally well-watered area where artichokes last for a long time. Once the artichokes of Beis Taifa have dried up, and the taifa is lashon of wet, the netef means to drip, tupin are droplets. Once even the artichokes of Beis Taifa have dried up, it must be assumed that all the regila has disappeared from the fields, and thus requires beer. It's interesting that it's called sigarios. Actually, the artichokes is called sigarios. Artichokes survive longer than purslane, and they last longer in Beis Taifa than anywhere else. Once the artichokes on fertile Beis Taifa have dried up, then the artichokes have surely dried up throughout the land, and once all the artichokes have dried up, it must be assumed that all the regila has likewise dried up. Mishnah Vav. The Mishnah is Hamalaka to Savim Lachem. If one gathers fresh, moist grasses and brings them into his home, Ad Shivash Hamasik, he may use them until the moisture of the Shemitah rains has dried up. Shivash Hamasik literally means the sweet. The moisture in the ground is called sweet because it sweetens and ripens the produce. At that point, it must be assumed that all the moist grasses in the field have also dried up and become inedible even to animals. At the time of until the moisture dries up, Ad Shivash Hamasik is meant not as an absolute deadline, but rather a rule of thumb. While the ground is still moist, it may be assumed that fresh grass is available to wild animals. Once the ground dries up, it's assumed that fresh grass is no longer available. However, if it is known for certain that fresh grasses can be found even after the ground has dried up, they do not have a chiyuv of beer yet. The same is true of the beer deadlines that the Mishnah is about to give for dry grasses, reed leaves, and grapevine leaves. If one gathers dry grass, he may continue using them until the second rains of the 8th year, because those rains make the dry grasses of Shemitah unfit for animals. In Eretz Yisrael, the rainy season begins with 3 major rainfalls. On average, the second rainfall occurs on the 23rd of Cheshvan. This Mishnah clearly views fresh and dry grasses as distinct species, each with its own beer deadline. This is because they differ greatly from each other in taste and appearance. So, although dry grass is found in the fields until the second rainfall of the 8th year, this has no bearing on the beer of the fresh grass, which becomes unfit for wild animals as soon as the ground dries up in the spring or summer of Shemitah, which is going to be way before that. However, this distinction applies only to the grass and leaves mentioned in the Mishnah. Other species have a single beer deadline for both fresh and dry produce. Only this that the Mishnah speaks out, that's when there's a difference between the fresh and the dry grass. Alekanim alekfanim. If one gathers fresh leaves of reeds and fresh leaves of grapevines, he may use them in the home until they fall from their branches, at which point they become unfit for animals. Wild animals eat fresh leaves of reeds and grapevines right off the plant and will not eat them after they have fallen to the ground. Accordingly, the beer deadline for these species arrives when the reeds and the grapevines shed their leaves. Beer is required at this point, even if dry leaves which animals do eat from the ground can still be found in the fields. As in the case of grasses, fresh and dry leaves are regarded as separate species because they differ in taste and appearance. If one gathers dry leaves, agitated v'yishnia, he may use them until the second rains of the 8th year, because those rains make the dry leaves of Shemitah unfit for animals. Rabbi Kiva says, "Bekulan agitated v'yishnia." In all these cases of grasses and leaves, whether they are fresh or dry, one may use them until the second rains of the 8th year. Unlike the Tanakhama, Rabbi Kiva views moist and dry grasses as the same species. Therefore, as long as any grasses at all, whether it's moist or whether it's dry, can be eaten by wild animals, all grasses are permitted, and the same would be true of leaves. Mishnah Zayin. Similarly, if a person rents a house to another and specifies that the lease should last until the rains, this means that the lease lasts until the second rainfall. The plural of Geshamim refers to the second rainfall in a season. He said Adak Shamim, which is Elashon Rabim, so that's the second one. And he may not evict the tenant before then. Likewise, if someone is prohibited by a neder to benefit from another person, and it is specified that the prohibition lasts until the rains, the prohibition, the neder, remains in force until the second rainfall. A neder is a vow by means of which a person can prohibit things that would otherwise be permitted. For example, if someone said about another person, any benefit from him is forbidden to me, he's forbidden to have benefit from that person. During the harvest season, poor people are permitted to enter private fields to gather the matnas haniyim, the portions of the produce that the Torah obligates the owner to give the poor people. Leket, shikha, and peah. The Mishnah's halacha applies to people who enter private fields in the 8th year to collect whatever Shemitah produce remain there as well. So, until when may the poor enter the people's orchards and fields to gather the matnas haniyim? Until the second rain falls. From the time the second rains fall, seeds of a new crop begin to sprout, and walking on the land harms the newly growing plants. Stubble and straw that grew during Shemitah have kedusha shviyas because they can be fed to animals. One is thus forbidden to use them in a destructive manner, such as a fuel for a fire. The Torah says, the uncultivated produce of the land shall be for you to eat. This pasuk teaches that the produce of Shemitah is yours to eat, but not to destroy or waste. As such, the Torah asks one to use Shemitah produce in such a way that it's destroyed before it provides benefit. For example, it may not be used as fuel for a fire because the fire does not give off heat until after the straw has been destroyed and converted into charcoal. So, from when may we benefit from or burn stubble and straw of Shemitah? When the second rains fall in the 8th year. At that point, the straw and stubble in the field becomes unfit for animals to eat, so one may perform beer with the straw and stubble that he has in his house. Once beer has been performed with them, the straw and the stubble lose their Shemitah, the kedusha shviyas, and may be used even in a destructive manner. According to this explanation of the Mishnah, it appears that stating a general rule that once beer has been performed with Shemitah produce, it loses its kedusha shviyas and may be destroyed. But if it's true, it's difficult to understand why the Mishnah says this rule only in connection with straw and stubble. So it's hard to hear the svara of why we're saying a dafka by Tevin Akash, maybe because it's not Michael Adam, but saying that it's totally Michael Adam is also be'etzem because it's Lechaya Shabbat Secha, and that's generally the zman of when it goes till. So to say that also wouldn't work out too well. Okay, Mishnah Ches. If a person has produce of Shemitah in his house when the time of beer arrives, he may distribute 3 meals worth of food to each member of his household and to each of his friends and relatives. When the Zman beer arrives, a person is allowed to leave for himself and other people of his choosing enough food for 3 meals, which suffices for the meals for one day. this food does not require beer. This is mutter only until Shkia on the day of the deadline. After Shkia, he may not distribute any remaining food to particular people, but must leave it out for everyone to take. He may distribute 3 meals worth of food to each member of his household and to each of his friends and relatives. He then leaves what remains at the entrance of his house, gives up his rights of the ownership in it, and says, "My brothers, Achenu Beis Yisrael, Achenu B'nei Yisrael, whoever has need to take, let him take." The lashon of the Rab is Zman Bir HaPeres L'fi Mekayman. He divides it up to his neighbors and to his relatives, Yoidav and his friends, and he carries it out, and he places it by the door of his house. Anybody who needs this food to take it, please take it. Poor people may take the produce and eat it after beer has been performed. Are not rich people to Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda holds. Although anyone, both rich and poor, may take Shemitah produce before beer, Rabbi Yehuda holds that once beer has been performed, only the poor are entitled to it. Rabbi Yossi Omer, both poor and rich people may take and eat it after beer. Rabbi Yossi holds that even rich people may take the produce after beer. Wherever it says that Shemitah produce is usher after beer, the case is where the owner failed to do the mitzvah of beer at the required time. The produce then becomes usher to everyone forever. However, if beer was performed properly, the peiros are permitted to, according to Yehuda, to the aniyim, or to everyone according to Rabbi Yossi. The Ramban says that the words of aniyim and ashirim here are not meant literally. Rather, rich refers to someone, even a poor person, who picked produce from his own field during Shemitah, while poor refers to someone, even a rich person, who picks produce from other people's fields. Rabbi Yehuda holds that after one has performed beer with produce in his own land, he may not take it back for himself. Only other people, the poor, may acquire it. Rabbi Yossi, on the other hand, holds that once the owner has left the produce outside and made it ownerless, as required by Hilchas Beer, he's allowed to take it back. Rabbi Yehuda holds that he can't because he's an oni. He's not an oni. Mishnah test. If someone has Shemitah produce that fell to him as an inheritance or was given to him as a gift, a person picked Shemitah produce in a way that was mutter, and then he died, and someone else inherited it, or he gave it to somebody else as a gift. Rabbi Eliezer says it should be given to others who will eat it together with him. He may not eat the produce by himself, because he would then be likely to express gratitude to his benefactor, which is osir. We learned in Parag Daled that Beis Shammai say that one who picks Shemitah produce is osir to thank the owner of the field, because he would thereby imply that the produce has an owner who has the right to withhold it from people, which would contradict the Torah's command to let the public take Shemitah produce. Rabbi Eliezer and our Mishnah follows Shitas Beis Shammai. It's interesting because the Gemara says in a few places Rabbi Eliezer Shemutehu, and Tosfos learns that Shemuteh is not necessarily from the Lashon of Shamta, or the Lashon of Cherem that they put him in, but he's from the school of Shammai, as we're seeing over here. Rabbi Eliezer Taka holds like Beis Shammai. It could be that a little bit more than that we know that Beis Hillel, the halacha is like Beis Hillel, and also Lo Beis Halacha is going to be like Beis Shammai. Really, it doesn't. I don't know if it could be means that literally, but the pashtus is that what it means is that Beis Shammai is more midas hadin, more strict, and we know that Rabbi Eliezer was more involved in the midas hadin. Okay, anyways. Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah follows the Shita of Beis Shammai. He therefore rules that if someone receives Shemitah produce as a gift or an inheritance, he may not eat the produce on his own, because he would then be likely to show gratitude to the person who gave it to him. Instead, he must share the produce with others. This halacha is difficult to understand, since the benefactor picked the produce in a way which was mutter. It became his own private property, which he has full rights of the ownership. Thus, showing him gratitude should be completely mutter, just like showing gratitude to any person from one who receives private property. The Chachamim say, the sinner, the recipient who sins if he expresses gratitude, should not receive any benefits from the produce for free. Rather, it should be sold to him. That is, he must pay for the produce, that he will not feel gratitude. And the money should be distributed to all people. The Chachamim argue that if the recipient of the gift or inheritance shares the produce with others, he will be thankful to his benefactor for it. He must therefore pay for the produce, that he will not owe anything to that person. Once he has paid for it, he may enjoy the produce even without sharing it with others. When making a dough, one is mechuyev to remove a portion and give it to the kohen, which is called challah. The Mishnah teaches that the chiv of challah applies even to Shemitah produce. If someone ate from a dough of Shemitah before challah was separated, he's mechuyev misa b'dei shemayim, just as he would be were he to eat a dough non-Shemitah produce before its challah was separated. It's called tevel and is mechuyev misa b'dei shemayim. It could have been thought that Shemitah produce is not mechuyev in challah because challah that became tamei must be destroyed, which cannot be done with Shemitah produce, since destroying produce of Shemitah is usher. The Mishnah teaches that in fact the chiv of challah does apply to Shemitah produce. This is learned out from a pasuk in the Torah, because Reishis Arisei Seichem Amra Torah Ma'izah Isa Shatia Challah Tarimu, so Mudach Alamal Challah Tarimu.